What if I told you? Intimacy in the Viking Age was wilder, stranger, and more dangerous than anything you've seen in movies. And it wasn't just between men and women. In a world of fierce warriors and powerful shield maidens, love could take many forms: whispered affairs in the shadows, forbidden same-sex bonds that defied the law, and scandalous liaisons that could spark blood feuds. The sagas hint at passion, betrayal, and punishment so brutal they could end not just your love life, but your life entirely. Before we set sail into this untamed past, drop a comment with the time you're watching. I love seeing where our fearless history travelers are tuning in from. And if you enjoy history told without filters, you might consider subscribing. No pressure, but this is a story most historians only dare to whisper. Ready? Let's enter the longhouse. You're barely tall enough to see over the edge of the longhouse table, but already you've heard enough whispers to know that Viking life has its own way of talking about bodies. The air smells of smoked fish, wood smoke, and wool, and you sit cross-legged on the packed earth floor, trying to act like you're not listening. The adults talk in a blend of loud boasts and soft secret tones, the loud bits about battles and trade routes, the quiet bits about who's sleeping where and with whom. Even now, you notice that sometimes those whispers aren't always about a man and a woman. No one says it too plainly. Instead, it comes in hints, sideways, glances, and half smiles. Growing up here, the body is not a mystery to be hidden until adulthood. You've seen people bathing in rivers, changing in corners, tending to babies in the open. Privacy is a luxury, and the line between public and private life is thin as the smoke drifting from the fire pit. You learn early that men and women are expected to marry, raise children, and keep the household going. But you also pick up that attraction doesn't always follow those tidy rules. It's there in the way an older boy lingers just a little too long, helping his friend adjust a helmet strap, or how two women laugh together in the weaving shed, with an intimacy that makes the other women raise their eyebrows. The longhouse is your school, your playground, and your listening post. In the evenings, the skalds, the poets, sing sagas of gods and heroes. Some of those gods don't fit into the neat boxes you'd expect. Loki, for example, shifts shapes, genders, even species in ways that make the older kids giggle and the elders roll their eyes. You start to realize that in this world, power and magic sometimes walk hand in hand with bending rules about who can be with whom. The gods themselves have stories that would be scandalous if they were about the neighbors. Still, for all the mythic freedom, your community has its boundaries. Words like arger or ergi, insults that accuse a man of being unmanly, of taking the wrong role in bed, are as dangerous as a knife. These words can start fights, end friendships, or drag someone into the thing, the open-air court. You understand that in this society, what matters isn't just who you love, but whether that love makes you lose face. Honor is the thread that ties everyone together, and once it frays, it's hard to mend. You remember one autumn, when a ship returned from the east. The crew brought back silk spices and a foreign storyteller who spoke of cities where two men could live openly as companions, even as husbands. Around the fire, some Vikings laughed. Others shook their heads, but a few listened without mockery. One of your older cousins, a warrior with a taste for exotic armor, asked more questions than anyone else. Later, you saw him wearing a piece of jewelry. The foreigner had given him something small, easily hidden under a tunic. But he wore it like a secret he wanted to keep close. For you, childhood is a mix of chores and observation. You grind grain, fetch water, feed the goats, all the while learning how relationships form in this close-knit, nosy world. You notice that friendship can be as intense as marriage, that a sworn brother or sister might matter more than a spouse in some hearts. Sometimes a pair of warriors will pledge themselves to each other's protection, a bond sealed with shared loot and winter-long nights talking in the dim light. It's not called love in public, but you wonder if that's what it is. When the traveling traders come, they bring more than goods. They bring new jokes, foreign tales, and a reminder that Viking culture is one piece in a bigger, messier world. From them, you hear about the Saxons' church laws, about the Frankish courts, where scandal can mean exile, and about distant islands where no one blinks if two women share a bed. You file these details away, knowing they don't match what's expected at home, but also sensing that people here aren't blind to the possibilities, just careful in how they speak of them. The seasons pass in cycles you can measure by the smell of the air. In winter, you sleep packed in, close with family, and sometimes neighbors, hearing every cough, snore, and whispered conversation. In summer, the air is full of salt from the sea and the clatter of shipbuilding. Through it all, you keep watching, learning the unspoken rules of affection in the Viking Age. People talk freely about strength, courage, and loyalty, and hide their softer desires in plain sight. And you, growing up under those endless northern skies, start to understand something that isn't written in any law, that love in all its forms is always there, moving quietly beneath the clang of swords and the hum of the loom. You see it in the lingering handshakes, in the shared cups of ale, in the way someone's eyes follow another across the firelight. You might not have the words yet, but you're already fluent in the language of watching. By the time you're old enough to join the adults at the feasts, you've already learned that Viking courtship is a little like trading voyages, bold, risky, and never entirely about what's on the surface. The longhouse glows in the deepening twilight benches, crowded the air thick with wood smoke and the yeasty tang of ale. There's laughter, clinking cups, and the occasional belch that earns a cheer. You've seen enough to know that for some this is the night to strike a deal for cargo or land. For others, it's the night to strike a deal for a heart. Courtship doesn't happen behind closed doors here. It unfolds under the eyes of the whole community. A man might offer a woman a finely carved comb or a string of imported glass beads. And the gesture is never just about beauty. It's a signal that he's willing to invest in her, literally. But sometimes the gifts go sideways, both in intent and in recipient. You notice that occasionally a warrior will pass a prized arm ring to another man, grinning like it's just token of friendship, while the recipient's ears turn the color of ripe berries. People notice, of course, but whether they comment depends on the reputation of the giver. The flirting here is a blend of subtlety and spectacle. A young man might wrestle another in the dirt, pinning him down with a little too much determination. Or two shield maidens might trade sharp-tongued insults in a way that leaves both of them smiling. You watch the exchanges and realize that attraction isn't always neatly contained in the paths set out by elders and matchmakers. It leaks through in gestures, in who offers to refill whose horn of mead and who sits just a bit too close when the benches are already full. Family politics, though, are never far away. You can feel the eyes of parents and uncles measuring potential matches like they're weighing grain. A union can mean more land, more warriors in the household, or a new trade route. That's why courtship often happens in plain sight. Every touch, every shared joke, every small gift is part of a performance for the people who ultimately decide whether the match can proceed. And yet, despite all this oversight, there's a current of rebellion. Not everyone wants the partner their family has in mind. Not everyone is looking for the right gender either. You remember one feast when a pair of young men, both from respectable families, ended up singing a duet for the room. It was meant to be a drinking song, full of nonsense verses and call and response. But the way they looked at each other over the rims of their cups made the whole room go quieter than usual. The elders laughed and shook their heads, pretending it was just youthful play. But later, you overheard one aunt telling another, if they were different sorts of men, that would be trouble. The tone made it clear that different sorts didn't mean weaker or lesser, it meant unwilling to keep such feelings hidden. For women, the dance of courtship can be just as layered. A weaving circle might be as much about gossip and sizing up potential partners as it is about making cloth. A shared spindle, an exchanged piece of dyed wool, these can carry meaning if you know how to read them. Some women are known to be close in ways that set tongues wagging, though the talk usually dies down if one or both eventually marries a man. Marriage, after all, is the shield that protects against questions whether or not it matches the person's true affections. There's also the lure of the outsider. Foreign traders, mercenaries, and even captives can draw the kind of attention that makes parents frown. The stranger's accent, their unusual clothing, their way of holding themselves, it's a temptation in itself. Sometimes these liaisons fade once the ship sails, but sometimes they leave a mark, a reminder that the heart doesn't always obey the same laws as the thing. Flirtation is rarely about grand declarations. It's in the exchange of an apple during a break in the feast, in the mock challenge, to an axe-throwing contest, in the way someone lingers by the doorway when they could have left. You begin to see that courtship in the Viking world is not just about winning someone's affection. It's about navigating the layers of honor expectation and the occasional dangerous whisper. The wrong match can cost you standing. The right one can raise you higher than a ship's sail. By the end of the night, you've seen it all, the loud boasts, the shy glances, the calculated generosity, and the risky gambles of attention. Somewhere in the noise, alliances are forming, some in full view, some in the shadows. The longhouse may be full of mead and music, but for many, it's also the stage where the next chapter of their life begins. And you sitting there with your own cup, warming in your hands, can feel the undercurrent that in this world, love and desire are as much a negotiation as any trade voyage and just as full of hidden cargo. By now, you've learned that not all love stories in the Viking Age follow the neat path from gift-giving to marriage. Some slip sideways into territory the law frowns upon, the gossip thrives on, and the sagas sometimes refuse to name directly. You first hear about these forbidden loves in half-whispered conversations, often starting with, "You didn't hear it from me," and ending with a raised eyebrow. The word eerie hangs in the air like smoke dangerous to breathe in too deeply. Same-sex bonds here can be complicated. Among men, there's a fine line between camaraderie and suspicion. Two warriors might be inseparable, sharing everything from spoils to sleeping space on long voyages, and no one will bat an eye until someone suggests that the bond is more than brotherhood. That's when honor comes into play. To be accused of being the passive partner is to be marked with shame, not because of the love itself, but because the society values dominance and control in every sphere. You've seen how quickly such accusations can escalate from exchanged insults in the mead hall to challenges at dawn with sharp steel in hand. Women's bonds are treated differently, though not always more kindly. You've noticed that when two shield maidens or farmers' wives grow especially close, the talk tends to stay in the realm of gossip, not duels. Perhaps it's because women's friendships are already expected to be warm, even intimate. But if whispers grow too insistent, if someone's daughter seems in no hurry to wed, or if a married woman spends more nights in another's home than her own, then the pressure begins. Families step in, trying to arrange marriages or move one of the women to another household. It's not always cruelty. Sometimes it's fear of scandal, fear of losing standing in a world where alliances are everything. The sagas don't speak of these loves often, but they do exist in the margins. You remember hearing the story of a warrior who swore an oath to protect another man for life and did through raids, winters, and political upheavals. The tale never calls them lovers, but the devotion is there stronger than most marriages you've seen. In another tale, a shield maiden refuses every suitor fighting alongside one particular woman until both are slain in the same battle. The skald sings of them as sisters in arms, but you can't help but wonder if there was more in their shared glances than military loyalty. You've also seen how these relationships are shaped by opportunity. In the close quarters of a ship, or during long winters in the longhouse, privacy is scarce, but so is supervision. Bonds form in the quiet hours, mending sails together by lamplight, tending wounds after a skirmish, sharing warmth under heavy furs. These moments are small, unremarkable to outsiders, yet they can be the beginning of something that has to live between the lines. Of course, secrecy has its risks. An enemy or even a rival at home might weaponize knowledge of such a bond. To accuse someone publicly isn't just to shame them. It's to question their honor, their fitness as a leader, their place in the community. You've heard of men stripped of property or women married off in haste because someone decided to speak too loudly. That's why those involved learn the art of misdirection, calling each other brother or sister, in public speaking, in coded jokes, passing gifts in ways that look casual to anyone else. And yet, there's a stubbornness to these loves. You've seen people endure cold shoulders, sly insults, and even open threats, rather than give up the one person who feels like home. In a world where death can come from a slipped oar or a sudden raid, perhaps some think it's better to grasp what happiness they can, even if it's risky. One summer, a ship docked with a crew that included two men who made no attempt to hide their closeness. They stood together at the prow, hands brushing heads, bent in quiet conversation. Some locals scoffed, others looked away, but a few younger warriors seemed fascinated, as if they'd been waiting for proof that such a thing was possible. By the time the crew sailed away, there were new whispers in the longhouse, not all of them disapproving. You realize that these forbidden loves are like the hidden streams that run under the frost, unseen by most but powerful enough to shape the ground above them. They rarely get celebrated in public, but they survive in the shadows, in the saga's silences, and in the careful, lingering touches that happen when no one else is watching. And as you sit by the fire hearing another round of songs about gods who change shape and lovers who defy expectation, you wonder if maybe the old stories were always telling you the truth, just not in the way the elders intended. By the time courtship, whether whispered or loud, turns serious, the talk shifts to something far less romantic: contracts. The glow of the feast fire gives way to the daylight of negotiation, where love meets the cold arithmetic of livestock silver and social standing. You're there on the edge of the gathering, pretending to busy yourself with scraping a drinking horn, but your ears are fixed on every word. The fathers, uncles, and clan elders are lined up like merchants at market, their voices even, but their eyes sharp. And in this moment, you can't help but wonder how much of marriage here is about the heart, and how much is just about the numbers. Betrothal in the Viking Age is a public business. The match might be the result of months of careful courtship or a sudden decision to secure an alliance before another family makes the same move. Either way, the betrothal contract, called a festarmal, is drawn up with the seriousness of a treaty. It lists the bride price under the dowry hymenfylgja, and often the settlement in case of divorce. You're struck by how little this part depends on the couple's own feelings. It's about land goods and the honor of both families. Silver coins might clink on the table, but livestock is still the real currency. A cow or a well-bred horse says more about a man's commitment than any poem could. Yet sometimes you notice that the bride or groom has a certain faraway look, as though their thoughts are on someone else entirely. Maybe on the friend they spent last summer's voyages with, or the shield brother who fought beside them in the spring raids. Those feelings don't vanish just because a contract is signed. They're simply pushed into the background. Occasionally, the process becomes a game of quiet defiance. You've heard of grooms who negotiated unusually generous terms for their bride's family, not out of generosity, but to ensure her comfort if the marriage soured. You've also seen brides slip tokens into the hands of friends just before the ink dries on the agreement, small secret keepsakes that mean more than the public exchange of silver. In those moments, the business-like tone of the negotiations feels like a thin veil over something much more personal. Witnesses are essential. No contract is valid without them, which means the whole community often knows the terms before the ink is dry. It's both protection and pressure protection from deceit and pressure to go through with it, no matter how one feels. A promise made in public is a heavy thing to break, and in this society, breaking it can tarnish not just your own name, but your entire family's. And then there's the hand fasting, the symbolic clasping of hands to seal the betrothal. It's a simple act, but the way the hands are held says volumes. Firm and straightforward means agreement. A lingering hold might hint at real affection. A grip that's too quick, too loose, people notice that too, and the gossip will spread before the sun sets. Still, for all the seriousness, there are moments when the human side breaks through. You remember one betrothal where the bride-to-be locked eyes with someone in the crowd, someone who wasn't her fiancé, and the faintest smile passed between them. No one else seemed to notice, but you caught it, and you knew that even the most carefully arranged contracts can't account for every truth of the heart. These arrangements also serve as invisible fences. Once a betrothal is in place, both parties are expected to behave as if already bound. Any hint of scandal, same-sex or otherwise, during this period can lead to broken agreements, forfeited bride price, or worse. You've seen the way some couples become model citizens overnight, while others seem to grow more restless, finding excuses to visit distant relatives or spend more time at the market than necessary. Sometimes the contract is the end of the story. The couple marries, runs, the household raises children. But other times, it's the beginning of a quiet double life. The sagas never quite spell these out, but you've heard the hints in the pauses between verses. And when you watch the last line of a betrothal agreement dry in the sun, you wonder how many such documents are truly binding, and how many are just another piece of Viking theater performed for honor while the real love story plays out somewhere else entirely. By the time the ink on the betrothal dries, the village is already stacking firewood and brewing enough ale to float a small ship, and you can feel the mood tilt from arithmetic to spectacle. The longhouse smells like honey mash, and roasted lamb benches pushed back garlands of dried herbs braided through the rafters to make the smoke smell almost pleasant. You've seen the ledgers. Now you're here for the theater. The procession starts with clatter and laughter, a shuffle of boots, and skirts crunching over gravel. The bride's hair, once braided like rope, comes loose in a slow ritual that makes the aunties dab their eyes. Keys jingle at her belt, a small chorus announcing that she'll run a household as seriously as any chieftain runs a ship. The groom carries a sword that's older than both of them, its hilt polished by generations of hands. He'll place it in her keeping, not because she needs permission to be brave, but because the family expects courage to be a joint account. Old customs are mixed in like spices. Someone brings out a hammer to bless the lap of the bride. People pretend it's only a symbol of fertility, but the jokes write themselves, and the room obliges. You take your spot near the high seat, where the oaths will be easiest to hear. Oaths matter here, the way hulls matter to boats. They keep the whole thing from taking on water the first time an argument hits it broadside. A skald steps forward, not too sober, not too drunk, and offers a verse that manages to praise both families without starting a feud over who's more glorious. The first toast is to the ancestors, the second to the new couple, and the third to the future children, which is everyone's polite way of pretending they're not waiting to see what happens after the last torch sputters out. Cups pass, and you watch what fingers do when they think no one's paying attention. A thumb, rubbing a knuckle, a pinky hooking another pinky. The small choreography that says we know each other more clearly than words. Gifts pile up like driftwood after a storm, bolts of cloth-carved combs, a pendant hammered from silver that once jingled on a foreign belt. There's practical stuff, too. A good knife, a spindle that spins so true you can feel its balance in your palm. Somewhere in the exchange, the groom presses the family sword into the bride's hands, the gesture as solemn as a speech. If they're lucky, one day a son or daughter will receive it back from her, the metal warmed by 2 lines of love. Then come the toasts that flirt with mischief. A cousin raises a horn to all the people who ever taught the groom what patience means, and the laughter has layers. A shield maiden on the bride's side lifts her cup to everyone who understands that love takes many shapes and is none of our business, and you catch 3 elders studiously examining their shoes. Nobody scolds her. If anything, the moment lands like a soft pebble in a big lake. You feel the ripples. Then they fade under the next round of jokes. Food arrives in waves. Platters of salmon glazed to sweetness, cabbage braised long enough to melt bread so dark it tastes like the field it came from. Children weave between ankles with bowls of berries, always on the brink of disaster, always miraculously righting themselves. Between courses, people stage friendly contests, arm wrestling on a table that wobbles, throw the ring at antlers, nailed to a post, improvised poetry duels that are half flattery and half light roast. You lose count of the times the bride and groom are told to kiss, and you lose track of how many times they steal a glance at each other without being asked. The vows themselves are plain-spoken, practical, and binding. No moonlit metaphors, just promises anyone can measure. To keep a roof sound, to keep a larder stocked, to stand together when the fjord freezes and when the market's greedy. Witnesses nod, not because the words are beautiful, but because they're heavy enough to stay put in a storm. It's not that romance is absent, it's that romance here puts on work boots and helps haul the boat. As the mead loosens tongues, the songs grow spicier, though never past PG-13 by today's standards. The elders pretend to be scandalized the way they always do, and the youths pretend to be innocent the way they never are. You notice the friend who once caught the bride's eye across a crowded betrothal. That glance turned into a gift, that gift into a story you'll never be told. And you watch how gracefully they keep to opposite ends of the room, orbiting, like two moons who know their tides. Public vows don't erase private constellations. They just make the night sky busier. At last, the bedding rite takes shape more pageant than intrusion. Friends escort the couple with banging shields and exaggerated advice laughter, big enough to cover the awkwardness everyone politely pretends not to feel. Shoes are tugged off as if they're helmets after a long fight, and someone hangs a sprig of evergreen above the curtain like a wish you can smell. A final horn is shared, one sip, two lives, and then the curtain falls in a ripple you can hear more than see. The room exhales a communal sigh that says, "May fortune favor what love and ledgers agreed." When dawn seeps in, quiet replaces clamor. There will be talk of the morning gift, the promise of silver, or land from him to her, not as purchase, but as security. And there will be fresh bread, because life always returns to chores. The garlands look a little wilted, the benches pushed askew, the air carrying last night's songs like a perfume that lingers on a shawl. You step outside into the pale light and hear gulls arguing as if even the sea has opinions about who married whom. You smile anyway. Weddings here are part ledger, part lullaby, and entirely public. But inside that publicness, the real vows are sometimes the ones no one heard, the tiny ones, the tender ones whispered at the edge of a candle's breath. The torches from the feast are barely cold when the longhouse returns to its usual heartbeat. The soft crackle of the hearth, the shuffle of boots, the sleepy coughs the sheep arguing about nothing in the byre end of the hall. The curtain that hid last night's pageant is folded away, and what remains is the ordinary miracle: two people, one roof, and 1,000 eyes pretending not to notice. You pad across the packed earth floor, the smoke line hovering at eyebrow height, and you can taste the faint sweetness of old mead in the air, like a memory that refuses to rinse out. Privacy. Of course, the kind that can be made with hanging a thick woolen blanket and everyone else's good manners. What could possibly go wrong? Your sleeping room isn't a room. It's a bed closet tucked into the wall, boards rubbed smooth by generations of feet, or a raised platform along the benches with a curtain that thinks it's soundproof. The mattress is straw, with a stubborn personality. The furs smell like winter and salt. And somewhere just beyond the curtain, someone snores in a rhythm that suggests they're chopping wood in their dreams. You learn the choreography of the longhouse quickly, the late-night whisper, the careful step over a dozing dog, the way you still move like you're in public, even when you tell yourself you're alone. Vows are public, but intimacy is a small craft you pilot in a crowded harbor. You get used to the way a cough from the far bench becomes a knock, the way a toddler's sleepy wail becomes a pause button, the way two newlyweds exchange a look that says, "We'll try again when the fire is lower." You also get used to the commentary disguised as kindness, a grandmother pressing extra herbs into a cup for rest, an uncle offering advice that sounds suspiciously rehearsed, a friend leaving a sprig of evergreen on the bedpost, as if fertility can be invited like a neighbor. Remember the hammer jokes from the feast. The humor lingers gentler now, half blessing, half deflection. Morning comes with chores that don't care how late the singing went. The first breakfast together is less candlelit romance and more logistics meeting: who fetches water, who skims the vat, who mends the sailcloth before the wind turns. The keys at your belt are not just jewelry, they are the syllabus of your new life. As Hus Freya of this corner of the world, you inventory, grain bins, count, cured fish, keep the thralls busy without burning them out, and keep a mental ledger of who will need wool when the first frost bites. As Bondi, you measure planks, check rivets, plan hiring for the next voyage, and pretend you didn't nick your thumb on the blade you sharpened too fast. Love here is domestic engineering, 1,000 small alignments that keep the longhouse humming. There's talk of the morning gift, the Morgengifu, and it's not romantic in the minstrel sense, but you feel the warmth in it anyway. Land silver, maybe a share in a ship, something that says you are secure, even if storms come. It's the opposite of those loud toasts. This is quiet software installing stability in the background, so the household doesn't crash the first time the harvest misbehaves. Later, when someone asks whether marriage is a feeling or a framework, you think of that gift and answer, yes. Honeymoon. Not a trip. Exactly more like a permission slip to keep the mead flowing for a moon's turn. The old idea that sweetness encourages sweetness. You don't vanish to a beach. You vanish into routine, which is its own kind of privacy if you do it right. Long evenings in summer help all that twilight stretching like taffy so the house can go quiet without anyone forcing it. In winter nights are long enough to write novels in your head while the snow makes the world behave. You learn to find intimacy in plain sight, the hand brushed in passing when you trade places at the loom, the shared bowl of stewed apples, the leaning shoulder, when the wind moans at the door like an unpaid singer. And because this is you, and your memory keeps good company, you notice the other orbits that haven't quite dissolved. The friend who once made the bride's eyes sparkles from a safe corner of the hall. The sworn brother who laughs a beat too quickly at the groom's jokes. Public vows didn't erase private constellations last night, and they don't today either. What changes is the etiquette. The longhouse is a stage that rewards grace notes, a slow fade, a redirect, a kindness extended at the exact moment a bruise might form. People here are talented at performing discretion as a group sport. First disagreements arrive on schedule, and they're almost boring in their predictability. A wet log that won't catch a missing comb, a cousin who borrows the good knife and returns it with an opinion about proper edge. You discover that love in a longhouse speaks fluent logistics. I'll tend the fire if you barter for salt. I'll take the late watch if you sleep now. I'll pretend not to hear the sheep if you pretend not to hear my father. You also discover that apology looks different here. It's not flowers. It's a mended net, a refilled water jar, a cloak shaken out and warmed by the hearth before dawn. When the house is very quiet, the architecture does its best to help. Those heavy curtains don't stop sound, but they do stop self-consciousness. The bench ends carve out pockets of courage. The hearth builds a low wall of warmth that makes the whole room agree to be gentle for a while. Your intimacy ends up braided with the house itself, the timber that creaks its approval, the smoke that keeps everyone's secrets by smelling the same no matter what. Over time, the longhouse becomes complicit, not in scandal, but in shelter. You learn to laugh softly about the awkwardness because everyone else does, and slowly, alarmingly, you start to enjoy the communal rhythm, the way a child's giggle from the far end helps you unclench, the way your neighbor's knitting needles set a metronome that calms your breath, the way the dog's sigh tells you the weather more accurately than any cloud. It's not a castle with a moat. It's a harbor with tide charts, a place where timing is the real secret. You keep your promises. You keep your humor. You keep your curtain looped on its peg, ready to fall, when the world agrees to be kind for an hour. What was the first night like? Less like a song and more like a learning curve. What are the next 100 nights? Like better. Because you build them together, plank by plank, until the longhouse stops feeling like a crowd and starts feeling like a chorus. By the time the rhythms of married life have settled into muscle memory, you start to notice how intimacy here isn't always about candlelight or stolen moments. It's often wrapped up in the daily grind. The clatter of the loom, the scrape of a whetstone, the steady thump of boots at the threshold. These are as much a part of affection as any whispered endearment. In the Viking world, love has to live in the same room as work. And as you lean on the haft of a broom, or straighten from the water, barrel a question slips in without warning. Do chores make the heart grow fonder, or just better organized? Gender roles here are drawn in broad strokes, but the paint has enough cracks for reality to seep through. As Husfreya, a wife, manages stores, oversees servants, directs brewing, and keeps the textile work humming like a quiet engine. Her belt keys jingle like the punctuation marks of authority. As Bondi, a husband, may farm fish raid, or trade, measuring his worth in yield coin and the strength of his allies. On the surface, it's a tidy division. In practice, you've seen couples trade tasks without fuss. She sharpens a blade, he checks a weaving pattern, because efficiency trumps tradition when the tide's coming in faster than expected. The seasons dictate the tempo. In summer, both partners rise with the gulls, chase the light through fields or shipyards, and fall into bed more from exhaustion than romance. In winter, the short days and long nights press everyone into closer quarters, and work becomes as much about keeping spirits warm as keeping bellies full. It's in these darker months that you see the quieter forms of affection, a cloak dried and laid over shoulders, before the morning chill bites a favorite drinking horn, refilled without asking, the better seat by the fire surrendered without a word. And then there's the gossip, the background hum of every longhouse. It's not always malicious, but it's constant. Who fetched water? With whom? Who lingered too long at the market stall? Whose laugh carried too far over the din? You've heard the sideways comments about two men spending too much time on repairs in the byre, or two women who seem to share more bread than a neighborly visit requires. Sometimes it's just idle chatter. Sometimes it's a social test, a way to see who will defend, deflect, or join in the smirking. Couples learn to navigate this atmosphere like ships in a busy harbor, adjusting sails to avoid the collisions of rumor. A husband might make a point of praising his wife's skill at the loom in public, even if their private life is more complicated. A wife might ensure she's seen laughing with her husband's friends, reinforcing the image of unity even if her warmest conversations happen elsewhere. It's a kind of theater, but one that most play willingly. The performance protects the parts of the relationship that actually matter. You've also seen households where gender roles blur to the point of invisibility. A wife who takes to the shield wall as easily as she takes to brewing, a husband who manages the spinning room with the precision of a ship's ledger. Neighbors may raise eyebrows, but results speak louder than norms when the stores are full and the walls are sound. Sometimes these partnerships are simply practical. Other times, they seem to carry the easy harmony of people who met each other halfway and decided to stay there. Children, when they come, shift everything. Tasks multiply time splinters, and intimacy has to hide in the spaces between feeding, teaching, and chasing small feet away from the hearth. Some couples grow closer in the shared project of raising the next generation. Others learn to divide and conquer. Either way, affection now often arrives disguised as relief, taking the late watch so the other can sleep, fixing a snagged fence before it becomes a problem, showing up with an armful of firewood just as the pile runs low. Through it all, you see how relationships here are built less on grand gestures than on sustained cooperation. The sagas may sing of dramatic rescues and passionate reunions, but the real foundation is made of split kindling, repaired nets, and meals served on time. And beneath that, sometimes, is another kind of foundation, the subtle alliances, the private fondnesses that stretch beyond the official bounds of marriage. They rarely rise to the surface, but you can spot them if you know what to look for. A glance too quick to be casual, a joke too private to be shared with anyone else. In the Viking Age, the heart learns to beat in time with the workday. Love is measured in loaves, baked sails, mended livestock counted in errands run without complaint. It's not always poetic, but it's durable. And in a world where the sea can swallow a man in minutes and frost can kill a crop in a week, durability might just be the most romantic thing of all. Even in a world that treats marriage as both a partnership and a public promise, the undercurrent of temptation never really disappears. You can see it in the way eyes linger too long across a crowded market, in the laughter that bends just a shade warmer than politeness requires. And as you settle onto the longhouse bench, sharpening a knife you don't actually need to use yet, you can't help but wonder, is infidelity here a sudden storm? Or is it more like a slow leak in the hull? You only notice when the water's already at your ankles. Jealousy doesn't have to come from scandal. Sometimes it sprouts from the soil of imagination. A missed greeting at the market, a story told with too much enthusiasm about someone else's voyage. These can plant seeds in even the steadiest hearts. In the Viking Age, reputation is as valuable as silver, so the mere suggestion of impropriety can do real damage. That's why people are careful about how they walk through public spaces, who they share a cup with, how long they linger over a conversation. But careful doesn't always mean innocent. Infidelity itself can take many shapes. Sometimes it's a single encounter brushed away like snow from a shoulder. Other times, it's a season-long connection that hides inside routine two people who suddenly take the same route home from the fields, or who seem to just happen to be on the same fishing crew. You've seen these patterns form and dissolve often without a single word spoken aloud to confirm them. And yet everyone notices. The longhouse may be dim, but it's not blind. For those who step outside their vows, the consequences vary. Among men, being discovered in a compromising position with another man can spark more than gossip. It can invite formal insult, legal action, even violence. The insulted party might challenge the offender at the thing, or demand compensation in silver or goods. Among women, the response might be quieter, but no less forceful relocation to a relative's home, sudden pressure to accept a new marriage, or in some cases a public shaming in the weaving hall, where every spindle click becomes a verdict. Jealousy, too, is performed differently here. You've seen men turn icy and silent, withholding the camaraderie that oils the gears of the household. You've seen women sharpen their tongues until every domestic exchange cuts just enough to leave a mark. And sometimes you've seen couples face the suspicion head-on, an argument that starts with slammed doors and ends with an exhausted truce over shared bread. The sagas have their own way of framing these breaches. In some, infidelity is a spark for epic revenge, a duel at dawn, a raid framed as justice, a feud that outlives the original lovers. In others, it's a side note mentioned once and never resolved, as if to say that life is messy and not every thread gets tied off. You can tell a lot about a storyteller's politics by how they treat these tales as cautionary tragic or occasionally almost sympathetic. Divorce here is a formal public act, but it's not uncommon. A spouse can end a marriage for reasons ranging from neglect to outright cruelty, and yes, for adultery. Announcements are made at the threshold of the home witnesses gathered, so no one can later claim ignorance. Property and dowries are divided according to law, and the social ripples spread fast by the next market day. Everyone will have their own version of the story, adjusted to fit their own morals. Of course, not every brush with temptation ends in a split. Some couples weather the storm, rebuilding trust, one small, deliberate act at a time, an unexpected gift, a shared project, a willingness to walk together through the market again. You've watched people decide that keeping the ship afloat matters more than charting a new course, even if the waterline will always bear the stain of the leak. And then there are those whose infidelity exists only in the eye of the beholder, friendships that look too warm, alliances that seem too personal, bonds between same-sex friends that make outsiders tilt their heads. In a culture so attuned to honor and appearance, the line between affection and threat can be drawn by anyone with a sharp enough tongue, which means that sometimes what's really being policed isn't love at all, but the performance of loyalty in the public square. Through it all, you see that infidelity, jealousy, and divorce aren't just private matters here. They're community events woven into the fabric of social life, whether the couple likes it or not. In the Viking world, a household doesn't exist in isolation. Every vow, every breach, every reconciliation is witnessed, remembered, and retold until the truth becomes just another story passed along with the ale smoothed and reshaped by every tongue it touches. By the time the first cross is raised in the village, you've already learned that love, in the Viking Age, has its own rules, flexible enough to stretch around convenience, yet solid enough to hold under pressure. But with the new faith come new voices, and they carry different blueprints. The priests talk about sin and virtue, the way shipwrights talk about holes and leaks, as if every joint and plank of your personal life should be inspected for signs of rot. And you find yourself wondering, when an old culture meets a new moral compass, does love get steered, or does it simply drift in disguise? The old gods had never been particularly squeamish about love's many shapes. They gave you Freya, who took lovers as freely as she gathered jewels, and Loki, who shifted gender as easily as other people changed cloaks. Stories like these made space for human variety. They didn't erase gossip or shame, but they allowed more room to shrug and move on. The sagas you've grown up hearing are filled with sly winks, unorthodox bonds, a certain acceptance that passion often ignores the neat boundaries drawn by parents and priests. Christianity's arrival doesn't wipe this slate clean overnight, but it starts scratching at the corners. Marriage becomes less of a pragmatic alliance and more of a sacrament. Same-sex bonds that once fit into the fabric of warrior fellowship are recast as moral hazards. Even casual flirtation between unmarried men and women earns sharper looks. The language shifts to words once used to tease now start to carry judgment, and legal codes slowly bend to mirror the church's teaching. You watch the transitions happen in small, uneven steps. One season, the Harvest Feast still features a bawdy skaldic verse that hints at two men sharing more than ale. The next, the same verse is left out, replaced by a psalm. At weddings, Thor's hammer still blesses the bride's lap, until the year a priest persuades the families to use a crucifix instead. The elders grumble that the new customs feel thin, like sails made of untested cloth. But some of the younger couples embrace them eagerly, hoping for the stability they believe the new order promises. The shift isn't just ceremonial, it creeps into law. Under older codes, a woman could divorce her husband if he failed to provide, and a man could challenge another in court for public insult, including accusations about his sexual behavior. Under Christian influence, the law starts to frame sexual conduct in terms of sin against God rather than just offense against honor. Certain acts once ignored or joked about are now cause for penance or worse. It's a change in the axis of shame, and you can feel the weight shift beneath your feet. Yet the old ways don't vanish quietly. You hear them in the jokes muttered at the back of the hall, in the sly gifts exchanged during Yule, in the sagas told by elders who have no patience for the stiff-backed morality of the new priests. For every cross nailed to a beam, there's a rune carved in a hidden place. For every sermon on chastity, there's a private meeting by the fjord where two people, sometimes of the same sex trade words, that make the air warm despite the frost. This cultural tug-of-war leaves the longhouse caught in a peculiar twilight. You might attend a Christian wedding where the couple still exchanges gifts of sword and keys, as if Thor and Christ are co-signing the union. You might hear a confession that sounds suspiciously like a boast dressed up in pious regret. And you might watch a divorce that follows the old steps to the letter, even as the priest tries to steer it toward the new forms. For those whose loves don't fit neatly into the new boxes, the shield maiden who cherishes her comrade more than her husband, the two sworn brothers whose bond has always had another unspoken layer, the shift is dangerous. Where once they risked only the cutting edge of gossip, now they risk the weight of moral condemnation. Some grow careful, guarding their truths like embers. Others adapt, translating their feelings into forms the new rules can't easily name, calling it friendship, brotherhood, devotion to the same cause. The bond remains, even if the vocabulary changes. Through it all, you sense that love in all its Viking forms is less fragile than either gods or priests assume. It adapts. It hides in plain sight. It slips into the spaces between chores, into the quiet of the loom room, into the shared watch over a winter sea. The faiths may argue over its shape, but the heart doesn't bother with theology when the snow is deep and the firelight is warm. And in that, perhaps, the Viking Age and whatever comes after will always speak the same language. And so, after watching old gods and new creeds wrestle over the shape of desire, you start to notice what survives both the stories. They're everywhere, humming in the corners of the longhouse, carried on the wind between market stalls stitched into the hems of cloaks. You might think the details of your life will dissolve into the salt air, but in the Viking world, Nothing truly disappears if someone can turn it into a tale. Which makes you wonder, in the end, do we remember love as it was, or only as it's retold? The sagas, half history and half theater, keep their own kind of ledger. They remember who brought home a bride with twice the silver in her Morgangifu than her sister. They note the warrior who left for a raid and returned with a sworn brother, who was never quite described as just a friend. They make room for the scandals, the reconciliations, the long marriages that weathered more than one winter's worth of storms. And because sagas are meant to be heard, not just read, every retelling bends a little toward the teller's taste, sharper, sweeter, or more forgiving than the truth. In the marketplace, gossip moves faster than ships. A playful shove at the ale stall becomes by evening a near duel fought over a glance. A private quarrel turns into a public lesson in loyalty. The fishmonger's apprentice, seen laughing too loudly with the blacksmith's daughter, is suddenly part of a romance that never actually happened. People here treat these embroidered truths as both entertainment and warning. They keep your ears busy while reminding you how quickly reputations can change. Even small gestures have long shadows. A carved comb given in passing might be found generations later in a burial mound, sparking theories about secret loves. A scrap of verse scratched into a piece of driftwood and tucked into a chest can survive a century and still make a great-grandchild blush. You realize that objects are the footnotes of these emotional histories, harder to argue with than memory, yet just as open to creative interpretation. Some tales aim to immortalize. A poet might craft a verse that turns an ordinary betrothal into a saga-worthy match, elevating two farmers' children to the same narrative shelf as kings and shield maidens. Others aim to bury the quiet erasure of someone's name from a feast song, the careful omission of a lover's identity in a story for the children. In both cases, it's not the events themselves that survive, but the choice of which ones are worth carrying forward. For the loves that bent the rules, same-sex bonds, cross-class pairings, affairs conducted with more discretion than most survival, depends on who holds the pen or the memory. Some are folded into euphemism companions whose devotion is noted but never explained. Others are left in with a wink, daring future listeners to read between the lines. And some are rewritten entirely, the edges sanded down until they fit comfortably into the new moral frame. You see it happen in real time. A scandal from your youth becomes in the mouth of a visiting skald a heroic misunderstanding that ends in laughter. A divorce, once whispered about in shame, is reframed as a mutual decision for the good of the farm. Even your own small part in the tapestry, a word spoken at the wrong moment, a gift given at the right one, shifts shape as it's passed along. The more it's told, the less it belongs to you, and the more it belongs to the community's need for a good story. By the firelight, as another winter wraps the world in frost, you listen to an elder recite a love story from 2 generations ago. You know the real version, or think you do, but you let the polished version wash over you. The embers glow, the benches creak, and the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and brewing ale. You understand now that the Viking Age doesn't just live in the deeds people do. It lives in the way those deeds are remembered, reshaped, and retold, until they belong as much to the listeners as to the ones who lived them. And maybe that's the truest legacy of all, not the vows themselves, not the feasts, not even the whispered scandals, but the way every heart, no matter how it loved, gets to echo in someone else's voice. Out here, on the edge of the known world, That echo is how you know you've mattered. After drifting through the smoky longhouses, overhearing whispered courtships, calculated betrothals, and the quiet defiance of forbidden bonds, you almost feel like you've learned the Viking heart from the inside out. You can picture the clink of silver at an engagement feast, the sly glance across the mead hall, the weight of a public vow. But then you wonder, what happens when all that tenderness and subtle maneuvering is stripped away, replaced by pure, unfiltered fury? Imagine waking to find your hands calloused from endless training, your body wrapped in furs, your breath clouding the morning air, and a wild primal roar already building in your chest. What if, instead of navigating Viking love, you were living as a Viking berserker? The first thing you feel is the cold, not the, oh, I forgot to turn on the heater kind of cold, but the kind that punches straight through your skin and into your bones, like it has personal business there. Your eyelids flutter open, and instead of your bedroom ceiling, you're staring up at thick beams of pine, blackened at the edges from years of smoke. The air smells like a strange blend of damp fir wood smoke and something meaty that's been cooking far too long. You shift, and a heavy pelt slides off your shoulder, a wolf skin thick and coarse. Your fingers grip it instinctively, as though it's the only thing between you and freezing solid. Somewhere in the distance, a deep rhythmic thump echoes a war drum, slow and steady, like someone's heartbeat amplified for miles. You try to make sense of it. No phone, no electric light, no hum of a heater. Just the crackle of a small fire pit in the center of the room, its glow throwing shadows that dance across the wooden walls. Around you, figures stir in the gloom, broad-shouldered men and women with tangled hair, some still half asleep, others sharpening axes. The metal sings against the whetstone in a way that tells you this is no camping trip. Their eyes sharp pale and far too awake for this hour, flick towards you briefly before returning to their tasks. A man with a braided beard and arms like tree trunks stomps past you. He wears a bearskin draped over his shoulders, the skull still attached and resting like a crown over his head. The sight is equal parts ridiculous and terrifying, like a mascot that could absolutely kill you. He grunts something in Old Norse harsh syllables that sound like stones clattering together. You don't understand the words, but the tone is unmistakable. Get up. And so you do, because refusing feels like the sort of decision that ends with you being thrown into a snowbank, or worse. Your bare feet hit the packed earth floor. It's colder than the air, and you quickly realize why everyone here wears boots made of stitched hide lined with wool. A pair is shoved toward you, roughly your size, though the smell suggests their last owner had a hard life and harder feet. You slip them on anyway, grateful for the warmth, and stand awkwardly among people who look like they've been awake since before the sun even thought about rising. The fire pops, sending a shower of sparks upward, and one of the warriors ladles something into a horn-shaped cup before thrusting it into your hands. You glance down, it's thick steaming, and smells faintly of meat and onions. Stew soup breakfast here isn't granola and coffee. It's whatever keeps you alive in weather that could kill you before lunch. You take a cautious sip, and it's surprisingly good, rich savory, heavy enough that you feel your stomach start to unclench. A low guttural chant begins at the far end of the room. It builds slowly, like the sea pulling back before a wave. You turn your head and see them, a small group of warriors standing in a half circle, eyes closed, swaying slightly. One clutches a drum, another a carved bone that rattles when shaken. The sound crawls into your ears and settles in your chest, and without meaning to, you feel your breathing fall into step with it. You try to remember what you know about berserkers. Somewhere in the fog of your memory, maybe from a late-night documentary or a podcast, you recall that they were legendary Norse warriors who fought in a trance-like fury, often wearing animal pelts, to channel the spirit of the beast. Some say they worked themselves into such a frenzy they felt no pain in battle, shrugging off wounds that would stop any normal fighter. Others suggest something more: chemical, hallucinogenic mushrooms, strange brews, anything to strip away fear and hesitation. And here you are standing, in the middle of it, holding a cup of stew, like the world's most confused new recruit. The chanting grows louder, and the others start to stomp their feet in unison, the rhythm shaking the floor. A woman with a long scar down her cheek catches your gaze and holds it, her expression unreadable. Then she nods, once slow and deliberate, like she's decided you might be worth keeping alive. You're not sure if you should be flattered or worried. Someone pushes an axe into your hands, not the polished, balanced kind you'd see in a museum, but a working tool of war. The wooden handle is worn smooth from years of use, the blade nicked in places from hard fights. It's heavier than you expect, and when you adjust your grip, the weight shifts with a kind of promise. This is no prop. This is something that has decided fates. You glance toward the doorway, where the pale light of dawn is seeping in. The cold air curls inside, carrying the scent of snow and distant smoke. Out there beyond the village is the life you apparently woke up in a world of raids. Harsh winters, and people who believe wearing a bear's head makes perfect sense. You don't know why you're here, but you're starting to understand. One thing: nobody in this place is going to let you just sit by the fire. The morning outside hits you like a wall. The cold here isn't just a temperature, it's an entire personality. And frankly, it's rude. Your breath fogs instantly, and you can feel the hairs inside your nose stiffen. Around you, the settlement stirs to life smoke curling from the thatched rooftops, the creak of wooden gates being hauled open, the low murmur of people trading, arguing, laughing. Somewhere in the background, a hammer strikes an anvil with a steady rhythm, sending sparks flying into the pale air. Before you can take it all in, the braided giant from earlier gestures for you to follow. His walk is a combination of lumbering weight and absolute certainty, like someone who knows exactly where he's going and exactly how much he could break along the way. You stumble to keep up as he leads you toward an open clearing at the edge of the village, where a half-frozen stream snakes past a small training ground. There's nothing formal about the setup, no neat lines, no shiny equipment, just an expanse of trampled snow, a scattering of log shields propped against stumps, and the smell of sweat that somehow survives even in this kind of cold. The warriors are already at it, swinging axes into thick rounds of wood, lunging with spears at straw targets, grappling in the snow, until someone inevitably gets flipped headfirst into a drift. It's chaotic, loud, and weirdly mesmerizing. Your introduction to this warm-up is abrupt. Someone tosses you a round shield, a solid disc of wood rimmed in iron, and before you can even get your grip right, a younger fighter is charging at you with a practice spear. It's padded, yes, but in the same way, a brick wrapped in a towel is padded. You manage to raise the shield in time, the impact bolting through your arms and into your teeth. The younger fighter grins, clearly enjoying this, and attacks again. This time, you angle the shield and push forward, trying to remember every movie fight scene you've ever seen. It's not elegant, but it works. The spear glances off, and you lurch forward into him. He stumbles back, surprised. From somewhere behind you, a voice shouts something approving in Old Norse. You don't understand the words, but you'll take the encouragement. The drills are relentless. You chop wood until your shoulders ache, then run sprints through knee-deep snow until your lungs feel like they're lined with ice. When you pause to catch your breath, the bearded giant, your unofficial handler, apparently claps you on the back, hard enough to make you stagger. His face breaks into a grin, and for the first time, you think you catch a glimmer of something like respect. You start to notice the way each fighter moves differently. The older warriors conserve energy, their movements efficient, precise, like a blacksmith striking only where it counts. The younger ones are all fire and muscle, eager to prove themselves, burning fuel they don't realize they'll need later. It's not just about strength, it's about knowing when to spend it. A sudden shout cuts through the noise. You turn to see two fighters locked in a wrestling match, their boots slipping in the churned snow. One of them, a woman with a shaved head and tattoos curling down her arms, gets the upper hand and slams her opponent down in a puff of white powder. The group roars in approval, some pounding their shields in rhythm. It's a reminder here, winning isn't just about skill, it's about making it look good. Somewhere in the middle of all this, you start to realize the purpose of the chaos. This isn't training in the modern sense, with carefully measured drills and safety protocols. This is conditioning you to expect the unexpected, to react without thinking, to stay on your feet no matter what, and to get up fast when you inevitably fall. There's no whistle, no coach's clipboard, just the cold, the noise, and the unspoken understanding that you either adapt or you don't make it. During a short break, you notice a few fighters gnawing on dried fish, washing it down with something from small leather flasks. One of them offers you a piece. It's chewy, salty, and tougher than jerky, but it does the job. You can feel the energy creeping back into your limbs. Beside you, the younger fighter from earlier wipes snow off his face and grins at you again, this time with less mischief and more camaraderie. Apparently, surviving the morning earns you points. As the sun struggles higher in the sky, more of a pale suggestion than actual warmth, you're put through one final test. The bearded giant tosses you an axe and points to a tall wooden post with a rough outline carved into it. You step forward, feeling the weight of the weapon in your hands again. This time, the handle doesn't feel foreign. You swing the blade, biting deep into the wood with a satisfying thunk. A ripple of approval moves through the group. No cheers, no dramatic declarations, just that subtle nod that says, "You're starting to get it." By the time the drills wind down, your arms are trembling, your breath coming in ragged bursts, and your legs feel like they belong to someone else. The others sling their weapons over their shoulders and head back toward the village, chatting casually, as though they haven't just spent hours trying to collapse each other into the snow. You follow every muscle complaining, but somewhere under the exhaustion is a flicker of pride. You made it through the morning, and in this world, that's no small thing. Back in the village, the training ground's chaos fades behind you, replaced by the smell of smoke, simmering pots, and freshly split pine. The longhouse door is propped open now, letting in slivers of the pale winter sun. Inside, the air is thicker, warm, smoky, with a base note of meat that's been cooking since dawn. Your stomach, already worn thin from the morning's drills, growls so loudly that the older woman, ladling stew at the fire, actually smirks at you before filling a wooden bowl to the brim. The stew is heavy and earthy thick with root vegetables and chunks of meat that might be lamb or reindeer. You're not entirely sure, and frankly, you've learned it's better not to ask too many questions in a place where the answer might be whatever we brought down this week. You balance the bowl in your hands, the warmth seeping into your fingers, and settle onto a bench between two broad-shouldered men, still flushed from the cold. One tears a hunk of dense dark bread in half and shoves a piece your way. It's chewy sour and studded with grains that stick in your teeth, but it pairs perfectly with the stew. Food here is functional. No garnish, no plating, no delicate drizzle of anything. It's all about fuel. The meat gives you protein. The vegetables and bread keep you from collapsing in the snow. But for a berserker, there's more to the menu than meets the eye. Across the fire, you notice a smaller pot bubbling away, tended with more secrecy than the rest of the meal. The bearded giant dips a ladle in, fills a cup, and hands it to the tattooed woman who flattened her opponent earlier. She downs it in 3 gulps, then exhales sharply, her eyes narrowing as though the drink just set something alight inside her. You've heard the rumors, of course. Some say berserkers drink special brews before battle, infusions of herbs, fermented honey, or even mushrooms. Modern historians still argue over what exactly they took. Was it just alcohol and adrenaline? Or were they tapping into something deeper, using plants like henbane or fly agaric mushrooms to blur the edges of fear and pain? Whatever it is you're guessing, it's not on the menu for newcomers. You take another mouthful of stew, and one of the men beside you leans over, speaking in slow, deliberate Old Norse. You only catch a couple of words, something about stirk strength and magic. He gestures toward the secretive pot and grins in a way that makes you unsure whether to be curious or concerned. It's not all mystery brews and rituals, though. As you eat, you start to notice the sheer variety of what keeps this place running. Someone drags in a barrel of salted fish from the coast, pale leathery fish, layered in thick crystals that will keep them edible for months. Another returns from the forest with a sack of nuts and dried berries, the kind of quick energy you can eat with one hand while the other grips an axe. Even the children darting around the benches chew on strips of dried meat as casually as a modern kid might eat a granola bar. One of the older warriors, his hair streaked with gray, begins to talk animatedly about a feast years ago when his crew returned from a successful raid. You can't follow every word, but the tone is unmistakable. This is a victory story. From what you gather, it involves barrels of mead, whole roasted boars, and an unfortunate goat that somehow ended up inside the chieftain's house. The table erupts in laughter at the punchline, and even without knowing the exact details, you find yourself smiling. The mead makes its inevitable appearance. It's served in carved wooden cups, thick and sweet, with a taste of fermented honey. The first sip is warm and comforting. There's a bite underneath a slow burn that works its way down your chest. You take another, and it's easy to see how this could fuel the boisterous energy that fills the room. But for the berserkers, the line between a warm buzz and battle fury might be thinner than you think. Every so often you catch sight of the bearded giant checking you from across the fire, as though measuring how you handle the food, the drink, the atmosphere. There's no test announced, but you can feel it. Everything here is observed weighed. How much you can eat without looking greedy. how you hold your drink without spilling it, whether you laugh when others laugh. It's all part of learning the rhythm of this place. Somewhere behind you, the rattling of dried seeds in a leather pouch draws your attention. An older woman, clearly a healer, pours a pinch into a small wooden cup, crushes them with the back of a spoon, and adds the mixture to the mysterious battle brew pot. She hums under her breath as she works a tune low and steady, like it's been passed down through generations. You can't help but wonder, is this where the edge comes from? Not just the physical training, but the alchemy, the blending of mind and body into something sharp enough to cut through fear. You finish your meal, placing the bowl carefully on the bench, and feel a steady warmth spread through you, not just from the fire, but from the weight of food settling in your stomach. The noise of the longhouse wraps around you, laughter, clinking cups, the scrape of knives on wooden bowls. Outside, you can hear the wind, picking up, rattling the shutters. Inside, though, there's a sense of shared strength, like every person here is part of the same pulse beating in time, ready for whatever comes next. You don't notice the shift in the room at first. It's subtle conversation, tapering off laughter, thinning out the scrape of bowls against benches going quiet. Then a deep low hum begins, not from one voice, but from many. It swells in the longhouse like the rumble of distant thunder. Your eyes follow sound to the far end of the hall, where the firelight dances against something massive hanging from the rafters, a bearskin, the head still intact, the mouth open in a permanent snarl. This is your hook into the real heart of the berserker myth. Forget the stew, forget the training in the snow. This is the part that lives in legends. One by one, the warriors stand moving toward the bear pelt with a reverence that transforms their swagger into something almost sacred. They don't speak. They don't need to. Every step is heavy with meaning, with the kind of tradition that doesn't get written down because it's too important to trust to ink. The bearded giant gestures for you to follow. Your feet carry you forward before your brain catches up. You can feel the heat of the central fire at your back, but ahead of you, the air seems cooler, sharper, like the moment before a blade touches your skin. The bear's eyes glass, perhaps, or some ancient preservation trick catch the firelight and glint as though they're watching. The first warrior in line stops beneath the pelt. He bows his head, mutters something low and rhythmic, then presses his forehead to the bear's snout. A second later, he steps aside, and the next takes his place. The ritual moves with the precision of muscle memory, each touch, each whisper identical, yet entirely personal. When your turn comes, the bearded giant's hand lands on your shoulder, grounding you like an anchor. Up close, the pelt smells of smoke earth and something wild animal oil that even centuries of preservation can't erase. You mimic the bow, the murmur, the touch. The bear's fur is coarse under your hands, and for a moment you feel absurd, like a tourist crashing a ceremony. But then something shifts, not in the fur, not in the air, but in you. A sudden awareness that this isn't just about the bear. It's about what the bear stands for: raw strength survival against all odds, the ability to face winter hunger and steal without flinching. When you step back, the giant's eyes meet yours. He doesn't nod, doesn't smile, just studies you for a moment before turning to take his place in the line. Whatever he was looking for, you either passed or failed quietly, but no one's telling you which. Once everyone has touched the pelt, the next phase begins. The longhouse doors swing open, and a rush of cold air sweeps in. Outside, the sun is low, painting the snow in long blue shadows. The warriors gather in a loose circle around the bearded giant who begins to speak in a voice that cuts through the wind. You can't understand all the words, but you catch fragments: honor, strength, spirit of the beast. A drum starts up slower than before, each beat deliberate. It's joined by the rattle of bones, then the low chant you heard earlier, now louder, sharper. The sound burrows into your chest, syncing with your heartbeat until you're not sure which is which. The warriors begin to sway, some with eyes closed, some staring straight ahead. You realize this is more than ceremony. It's a mental sharpening, a way of turning the mind into a weapon long before the axe swings. Your modern brain tries to compare it to things, team huddles before a game, soldiers chanting cadence, but those are surface-level echoes. This is older, heavier, a binding of identity to something bigger than yourself. Here the bearskin isn't just a trophy, it's a contract. Touch it, and you've agreed to carry its weight into battle. As the chant builds, the bearded giant lifts the bear's head and drapes the pelt over his shoulders. The transformation is instant, not in body, but in present. He seems taller, broader, his shadow stretching longer in the snow. One by one, others do the same with wolf and fox pelts, each animal a totem, a reminder of the traits they want to embody: cunning, ferocity, endurance. Then, without warning, the chant stops. The silence is so abrupt, it feels like someone pulled the air out of the world. The giant looks around the circle, his gaze lingering on you for a beat too long. And then he turns toward the open path leading into the forest. The others follow without hesitation, leaving deep, crisp footprints in the snow. You're left with no real choice but to step into line. The forest swallows you almost immediately. The trees are tall and close set, their bare branches laced with frost, the snow underfoot, muffling the sound of movement. You can still see the pelt draped across the giant's back ahead of you, the bear's head bobbing with each step. Somewhere between the steady march and the cold bite of the air, the morning's fatigue falls away, replaced by a taut, quiet readiness. The path through the forest narrows until you're brushing past the frost-crusted branches, the snow whispering under your boots. The air feels different here, denser, like it's carrying the weight of things you can't see. The bearded giant leads the way into a small clearing where the snow has been trampled down and blackened patches mark old fires. At the center, a low stone altar squats, like it's been waiting centuries for you to show up. Around it are bundles of animal bones, feathers, and carved wooden figures whose faces are worn down by time and weather. The group fans out in a loose circle. No one explains what's about to happen, but you can sense it in the way their posture changes, looser, more deliberate, as if they're stepping out of the present and into something older. The healer you noticed earlier approaches the altar, her hands cupped around a clay bowl that sends up thin curls of aromatic smoke. The scent is heady, earthy, almost sweet, like a blend of pine resin and herbs. She sets the bowl down, then pulls a pouch from her belt and scatters something onto the coals. The smoke thickens, drifting in lazy spirals that seem to paint the air itself. You're not sure if it's your imagination or the lack of oxygen, but the edges of the world start to soften. Shapes blur, slightly the firelight bending in ways it shouldn't. The warriors begin to hum again, low at first, then rising into a chant that echoes off the trees. One by one they step forward to the altar. Each carries something: an amulet, a strip of cloth, a carved token, and places it on the stone. Some touch their forehead to it. Others press their palm against it and close their eyes. When your turn comes, you fumble for something to offer. Your hand finds a small, smooth stone half buried in the snow. You wipe it off, step forward, and set it down. It feels inadequate compared to the ornate charms around it, but no one laughs or scowls. In this space, the act matters more than the object. The bearded giant moves last. He kneels before the altar, pulls the bear pelt from his shoulders, and drapes it over the stone. His head bows low, his voice rumbling out words you can't understand, but can almost feel. The chant behind you grows louder, the rhythm faster. The healer circles the group, sprinkling drops of some liquid from a carved horn. When it hits your skin, it's shockingly cold, sending a shiver down your spine. The ritual shifts. Two warriors take up drums, striking them in a heartbeat pattern that seems to sync with your own. The smoke curls thicker, swirling in patterns that your mind starts to trace without meaning to. The air feels alive, as though the trees themselves are leaning closer to listen. And then the howling starts. It's not random noise, it's controlled, deliberate. Each warrior throws back their head and lets out a long, rising howl that vibrates through your ribs. Some sound like wolves, others like the low growl of a bear just before it charges. It's eerie, primal, and so convincing you half expect to see animals slip out from between the trees. Without realizing it, your own throat opens, and a sound you didn't know you could make rips free. There's a strange clarity in it. You're not thinking about your bills, your phone, your to-do list. You're not even thinking about the cold. You're just here, standing in a ring of people who believe so fully in the spirit they're invoking that it starts to believe in itself. You wonder if this is what gave berserkers their edge. Not just the herbs, not just the training, but the sheer, unshakable conviction that they were more than human when they stepped onto the battlefield. The chanting fades, the howls taper off, and the only sound left is the wind threading through the branches. The bear pelt is lifted from the altar and placed back over the giant's shoulders. One by one, the warriors retrieve their tokens, tucking them into belts or pouches. You take your stone, feeling its cool weight in your palm, and slip it into your pocket. It's just a rock, but in this moment, it feels like something else entirely. Without a word, the group turns toward the edge of the clearing. The snow crunches softly underfoot as you follow the smoke still clinging to your clothes. The forest seems quieter now, as though the trees are holding on to the echoes of what just happened. The forest thins, and the ground under your boots changes from soft snow to a crust of frozen mud mixed with shards of ice. Ahead, the land stretches open into rolling white-covered hills that lead toward a distant glimmer of gray water. The air smells different now, carrying a tang that prickles your nose and dries your lips. The sea. It looks calm from here, but there's an energy in that flat horizon, like it's hiding something under its steel-colored surface. The bearded giant calls a halt at the edge of a shallow ravine, where the wind is a little less punishing. The warriors drop their packs, roll their shoulders, and stretch limbs that have been carrying heavy loads for hours. You realize now that this march isn't just about getting from one place to another. It's about conditioning you to keep moving, to manage your strength when the journey is longer than your mind wants it to be. There's no idle chatter, no dramatic speeches, just the quiet efficiency of people who know what needs doing. One warrior checks the straps of his shield, tightening them until the leather creaks. Another leans on her spear eyes, scanning the horizon like she's memorizing it. Even the younger fighters, who were grinning and jostling earlier in the day, are subdued now. It's not fear exactly, but a narrowing of focus, the same way a runner changes just before the starting gun. You take a swig from a leather flask someone shoved at you before leaving the village. The water inside is cold enough to sting your teeth, but it's a relief after hours of breathing air that feels like it's been sharpened. As you hand it back, you notice the path ahead isn't really a path at all, just a faint trail carved by feet paws and sled runners over who knows how many seasons. The march resumes. The land begins to slope downward, the air growing saltier with each step. Somewhere in the distance, gulls cry out their voices harsh against the wind. The sound is oddly grounding. It means you're nearing the coast. You try to imagine what this moment would have felt like for real berserkers marching toward a raid, the sea promising both wealth and danger. They weren't just warriors. They were also travelers, explorers, sometimes traders. The same hands that swung axes could row a longship for days without touching land. Eventually, the snow thins enough to reveal patches of frozen grass and dark soil. The giant raises his arm, and the group halts again. Down below, nestled between two rocky outcrops, lies a cluster of longships pulled up onto the shore. Their hulls are tar dark, their prows rising into carved dragon heads that seem to glare across the water. Even at rest, they look like they're ready to leap forward the moment they touch the tide. The warriors descend toward the ships, their movements quickening, as if the sight of the boats ignites something in their blood. You can feel it too, a shift in the air, a mix of anticipation and unease. The smell of tar salt and old wood rises to meet you, along with the creak of ropes swaying against the masts. Without being told, you find yourself helping to load supplies onto one of the vessels. Barrels of dried fish sacks of grain, bundles of spare weapons wrapped in oiled cloth. Each item has its place, each rope its knot. There's a rhythm to the work, and even without speaking the language, you can follow along. You're part of the machine now, one more moving piece in a system that's been refined over centuries. When the work is done, the group sits for a brief rest on the damp sand. The horizon is darker now, heavy clouds smudging the line where sea meets sky. The bearded giant says something to the tattooed woman, and she nods, standing to address the group. Her voice is steady, carrying just enough over the wind for everyone to hear. You can't catch all the words, but the meaning seeps through. They will sail with the tide, and the tide is coming soon. You glance back toward the hills. You cross their pale shapes, already softening in the distance. The village is out of sight now, tucked away behind the folds of the land. Ahead, only the sea waits. In this moment, it's hard to tell whether you're leaving something behind or moving toward it. The tide begins to swell, the sound of the waves growing more insistent. Warriors stand lifting shields and weapons, checking straps and adjusting cloaks against the wind. The giant moves to the prow of the nearest ship, resting one massive hand on the carved dragon's head. The gesture is almost gentle, like a quiet conversation between two old friends. When you step into the longship, the wood flexes slightly under your boots. The benches are worn smooth from generations of oarsmen, and the smell of salt water seems baked into every fiber. You sit where you're told an oar, in front of you the blade, resting just above the dark, restless water. The first pull of the oar nearly yanks your arms from their sockets. Nobody warned you how heavy water feels when it's resisting you directly. The longship slices forward the bow, lifting slightly as the warriors row in perfect rhythm. You, on the other hand, are half a beat behind paddle too early, and you throw off the timing. Too late, and you're fighting against the oar in front of you. The man beside you catches your eye, gives a short nod, and you start sinking to his movement instead. It's easier that way, like falling into the current of a river. The sea wind hits harder out here, sharp enough to make your eyes water. You can taste the salt on your lips, feel the cold creep into the gaps in your clothes. Still, there's something hypnotic about the motion, the dip, pull, lift, and the faint splash as the oar breaks the surface. The dragon-headed prow points toward a strip of pale dawn on the horizon, but the rest of the sky is bruised with gray clouds that promise trouble. Here's the hook you always imagined. The start of a battle would be loud, chaotic, like the movies. But the reality is quieter, at least at first. It's the quiet of held breath, of a collective mind, focusing on the same point in space. Every warrior here knows that soon the calm will break, but for now, it's about conserving energy, staying ready, and letting the tension build like a drawn bowstring. The bearded giant stands at the prow cloak snapping in the wind. He doesn't need to shout commands. The crew moves as one, as though they can feel his decisions before he makes them. Every so often, he glances back toward the stern, where the steersman works the long oar, guiding the ship with slight adjustments. You realize how much of this journey depends on coordination. Every role matters, even the quiet ones. As the hours pass, the sea changes character. The swells get higher, the oars cut deeper, and spray lashes your face. The salt stings, but you keep rowing, your muscles burning in a way that feels both punishing and strangely satisfying. This isn't a gym set where you can quit when it hurts. This is the kind of work where stopping isn't an option. Then a call from the prow. Heads turn. You follow their gaze and spot a faint smudge on the horizon land. At first, it's just a darker shadow against the gray water. But as the ship cuts forward, shapes begin to emerge. Cliffs, a scattering of houses, a thin line of smoke curling into the air. The atmosphere shifts instantly. Conversations die off. Warriors adjust their grips on shields and weapons. The bearded giant exchanges a few words with the tattooed woman, and she moves down the line of rowers, speaking quietly to each one. When she gets to you, she just looks you over, then pats the haft of your axe with a faint, knowing smile. You remember what you've read about Viking raids, not the overblown myths, but the practical strategy. Surprise was everything. They could land strike and be gone before the defenders had time to rally. That meant timing the approach, reading the wind, and hitting hard in the first moments. Looking around at the crew, you can see they're already mentally there, eyes narrowing, movements tightening. The closer you get, the more details come into view. The coastline curves into a small bay, its beach guarded only by a thin strip of rocks. Behind it, the settlement seems quiet, too quiet. No alarms, no movement beyond a few drifting curls of chimney smoke. Either they don't know you're coming, or they've decided not to show it. Both possibilities feel dangerous in different ways. The giant raises his arm, and the rowing slows. The ship glides forward on momentum alone. The only sounds the creak of wood and the slap of water against the hull. The other longships fan out slightly, keeping pace. You grip your oar tighter, heart thudding in time with the waves. Then, with no signal, you can see the pace explodes. Oars bite into the water muscles, strain, and the dragon heads surge toward the shore. The prow cuts the first shallow wave with a spray that soaks your boots, but you don't care. The beach is rushing toward you now, the pale sand and dark rocks growing sharper with each stroke. The keel grinds into the shallows, and before the ship has even stopped moving, Warriors are over the sides, splashing through knee-deep surf. You follow the water, shockingly cold, your legs heavy from the march and the rowing, but somehow still carrying you forward. The axe in your hand feels like an extension of your arm now, not graceful, but ready. The air is full of sound. Again, boots on wet sand, shields slamming into place, voices shouting orders you don't need translated. The calm is gone. Whatever happens next, you've crossed the line from training and ritual into the real thing. The first thing you notice on the shore isn't the enemy, it's the smell. A mix of seaweed wetwood and the faint tang of smoke from the settlement ahead. The warriors spread out instinctively, shields angled, weapons raised. You mimic their stance, trying to remember the morning drills. But here the snow is replaced by sand that shifts underfoot every step, threatening to steal your balance. The bearded giant moves up the line, his bear pelt darkened with seawater at the edges. He doesn't bark orders, just meets each fighter's eyes in turn, as if to remind them they already know what to do. Then he turns toward the village and starts walking. Not charging, not creeping, just a steady, unhurried pace that somehow feels more intimidating than either. The rest of the group follows the rhythm of their boots crunching in sync. As you pass the first cluster of wooden huts, the quiet feels unnatural. A few chickens scatter, but there are no shouts, no running figures. The only movement is a door creaking in the wind. You start to wonder if you've landed in an abandoned place, but then a sharp sound cracks through the air, a voice high and urgent calling in a language you can't quite catch. In an instant, shapes appear between the houses, men clutching axes, a few with round shields, others with whatever tools they grabbed in haste. There's no hesitation from the warriors at your side. The front line tightens, formation shields locking together. The defenders hesitate just a beat, but that's all it takes. Your group surges forward with a roar that shakes your ribs. You're carried along in the wave, the air filling with the ring of metal, the thud of wood against wood, and the short, sharp grunts of effort. It's chaotic, in a way training never is. There's no neat pattern, no one telling you when to move. You react on instinct, raising your shield when something flashes in the corner of your eye, stepping aside just as someone barrels past. Your axe meets another's with a jolt that rattles your arms. You push forward not because you're fearless, but because stopping would mean being trampled by the fighters behind you. Within minutes, the first clash breaks apart. The defenders scatter, some retreating deeper into the village, others dropping their weapons and vanishing between buildings. The warriors don't chase recklessly, they move with purpose, breaking into smaller groups to secure the area. You follow one cluster to a larger building, its roof sagging under the weight of years. Inside, the air is warmer, the walls hung with dried fish and bundles of herbs. It feels almost domestic until the tattooed woman sweeps through checking corners with her spear. Outside again, the village feels different. The initial burst of noise has faded, replaced by a strange mix of sounds. The creak of rope as someone ties a bundle of supplies, the murmur of voices speaking low, the distant crash of waves. You see warriors carrying sacks of grain, coils of rope, even carved chests. This isn't wanton chaos, it's targeted, organized. Take what's needed, leave the rest. You spot the bearded giant near the center of the village, speaking to two of the defenders who've clearly surrendered. Their weapons lie in the snow, and they stand with their heads lowered, not meeting his gaze. You can't hear the words, but the tone is firm, not mocking. He gestures toward the longships, then toward the hills beyond the bay. Whatever agreement Struck, the two men nod and step aside. It's in the stillness afterward that you realize the shift inside you. Hours ago, you were an outsider stumbling through drills and rituals you barely understood. Now you've moved with them, matched their rhythm, survived your first clash on foreign ground. You're not part of the inner circle, yet not by a long shot, but you've crossed some invisible threshold. As the warriors regroup, you find yourself glancing back toward the longships. They look smaller from here, but also more significant lifelines, waiting to carry you away when the work is done. A few figures are already making trips back to the shore, loaded down with supplies. Others stand watch at the edge of the village, scanning the tree line for signs of a counterattack. The sky above is darker now, clouds piling high and heavy. The smell of snow rides the wind, mixing with the salt of the sea. Somewhere in your mind, you register that soon you'll be marching back through those hills, only this time with the weight of what you've done riding on your shoulders. The march back begins without ceremony. There's no triumphant shouting, no dramatic waving of banners, just the steady crunch of boots in snow, and the occasional creak of leather straps under the weight of gear. Each warrior carries something: a sack of grain, a coil of rope, a bundle of weapons, even a few strange trinkets whose value is probably more symbolic than practical. You're carrying a small chest that feels heavier with every step, not just because of the weight, but because you know what it represents. The village is already fading behind you, its roofs shrinking into the pale horizon. The wind comes harder now, unblocked by the shelter of buildings slicing through the seams of your clothes. Every inhale stings your lungs, but you keep pace. The bearded giant moves somewhere near the front, his bare pelt rippling in the gusts like it's alive. Nobody lags, and nobody talks much. The energy here has shifted from the tense focus before the raid to a quieter, heavier mode. It's in this quiet that you notice the signs of wear on the people around you. The older warrior with the streaked gray hair walks with a slight limp, now his shield strapped across his back instead of in his hand. The tattooed woman rubs her left shoulder every so often, as though rolling out a stiffness. Even the younger fighters have lines of fatigue around their eyes, though they mask it well. You start to see it clearly. This life takes something from you each time you answer its call. There's a reason berserkers were both feared and revered. The stories always talk about the battle frenzy, the impossible feats, the way they seemed immune to pain. They rarely mention what happens afterward, the exhaustion that seeps into your bones, the way your hands shake once the adrenaline fades, the long treks home, where every step is a reminder that you've traded a piece of yourself for victory. The snow starts again, thin flakes at first, then a steadier curtain that blurs the line between land and sky. The path grows slippery, the ground uneven underfoot. You keep moving your mind, wandering in odd directions. You think of modern endurance, athletes, soldiers returning from deployment, even paramedics finishing a brutal shift. Different worlds, same truth. The cost of intensity is paid in the quiet afterward. A low whistle from ahead snaps you back to the present. The group halts near a cluster of trees where the wind is less fierce. People drop their burdens, stretch, take long pulls from flasks. You sit on a fallen log, flexing your fingers, and realize they're cramped from gripping the chest's handles too tightly. Beside you, the younger fighter from your first training session grins and nudges your arm, holding out a strip of dried meat. You accept it with a nod. It's tough and salty, but the gesture is what matters. When the march resumes, You notice how the pace quickens as the hills ahead come into view. The familiar shapes of the land near the village stir something in the group, a pull toward warmth, food, and rest. You feel it too, a faint eagerness layered over the fatigue. By the time the first rooftops appear through the snow, the sky has gone a deep, dim gray. Smoke rises from the longhouse chimney, curling into the wind. The gates are open, villagers waiting to meet the returning warriors. There are no parades, no garlands, just a quiet acknowledgement they came back, and that's enough. Inside the longhouse, the change in temperature hits you like a wave. The smell of burning wood, roasted meat, and damp wool fills the air. People shed cloaks and pelts, stacking weapons in a corner. The loot is placed near the fire for inspection, the smaller items sorted quickly, the larger ones set aside for later. Conversations start up again, slow at first, then warmer as the mead flows. You ease yourself onto a bench, the weight of the day finally settling into your muscles. Around you, warriors laugh softly, share quiet words, or simply sit in companionable silence. The battle is already slipping into memory, but its mark remains in the way people carry themselves, in the shared glances that need no words. And you understand more than you did that morning that this is the price of the rage. Not just the physical toll, but the way it binds you to those who've paid it too. The longhouse grows warmer as the evening deepens, the firelight painting the walls in slow flickering gold. Outside, the wind howls against the wooden beams, but inside, the sound is muffled, like the storm is something happening in another world. You sit with your back to one of the thick beams, feeling the heat seep into your bones. The aches in your arms and legs have dulled to a steady throb, not pleasant, but familiar now, like the background hum of a machine you've learned to live with. Here's the hook you always thought. The end of a story like this would feel like triumph, a cinematic freeze frame of glory. Instead, it feels quieter, heavier, like closing the lid on a chest you're not sure you want to open again. The faces around you aren't grinning with victory. They're reflective, even guarded. The truth is, for a berserker, there's no clean ending. Every fight bleeds into the next. The bearded giant sits near the fire, his bear pelt steaming faintly from the damp. He says little, but his eyes move from person to person, checking injuries, weighing silences. The tattooed woman leans against a post, one hand wrapped around a cup of mead, her gaze lost somewhere in the fire's shifting embers. Even the younger fighters, who started the day with restless energy, now move slower, speaking in low voices. A healer makes her rounds, dabbing salve onto a split knuckle, here wrapping a sprained wrist there. When she reaches you, she inspects the small blisters along your palms, from gripping the axe and chest handles. She doesn't speak, just presses a cloth into your hand, soft, clean, smelling faintly of herbs, and moves on. The simple gesture feels almost ceremonial, as if acknowledging that you've crossed some unspoken threshold. The meal is smaller than you expected. No overflowing platters or endless drinking, just enough to fill the stomach and keep the body steady. The stew is thicker tonight, richer with fat, and the bread is still warm from the coals. As you eat, the low murmur of conversation blends with the crackle of the fire, a sound that feels like it could go on forever. Later, someone begins to speak a story you think, though the Old Norse slips past your understanding in waves. Still you catch pieces. The name of a river, a winter storm, a battle fought years ago, its details worn smooth by retelling. The warriors listen without interruption, their faces lit in orange and shadow. You realize this is how history lives, not in written records, but in voices around the fire passed from one set of ears to the next, until the line between truth and legend blurs. The night stretches on. People drift away to their sleeping places, some curling near the fire, others disappearing into the shadowed alcoves of the longhouse. The bearded giant rises last, hanging the bear pelt carefully on its peg before stepping into the darkness beyond the door. The sight stays with you, how even the fiercest warriors eventually lay down their symbols of power, if only for the night. When you finally lie back on the pile of furs that serves as your bed, the exhaustion hits like a weight, pressing you into the earth. You close your eyes, hearing the wind outside, the faint murmur of voices, the pop of the fire. Somewhere in that haze between waking and sleep, you think about what tomorrow might bring. Another march, another battle, or something else entirely. And then it clicks. The life of a berserker isn't about one defining moment, one great fight or victory. It's about living in the space between knowing the calm will never last, but meeting it anyway, holding it close when it comes. The final fight isn't some distant dramatic event. It's every choice to keep going every time you stand, when it would be easier to stay down. You drift off with that thought, the furs warm around you, the sounds of the longhouse steady in your ears, and the strange, unexpected certainty that no matter what comes next, you've already earned your place here. So now, as the fire in the longhouse burns low, you let the day slip quietly away. You felt the bite of the cold, the weight of the oar, the rhythm of boots on frozen ground. You've shared in the rituals, the meals, the unspoken bond that ties warrior to warrior. And in all of it, you've glimpsed what it means to live as a Viking berserker, not just in the fury of battle, but in the stillness that follows. Outside, the wind hums through the dark, steady and endless. Inside, warmth and quiet fold around you like a heavy fur. Your breath slows, the distant sea keeps its own rhythm, and you drift, carried gently toward sleep, safe in the echo of ancient footsteps.